Hi everyone, Emma McCann, your pleasure coach here. This video I want to unpack a little bit more about sexuality. So in a previous video I talked about sexuality basically being this underlying drive that can essentially color the entire way we carry our being and how we do our walk in the world. Our sexuality is much more than our behavior in the bedroom or wherever you choose to do your horizontal tango. So this video, I want to unpack that a little bit more. So we're going to talk about the domains in which your sexuality can play out and be influenced in. So these are your biological, so need to procreate, your erotic, so the pleasurable aspects of sex and sexuality. And then there are spiritual, physical, emotional, and social ties with our sexuality. So these 6 areas are all areas that influence our sexuality, how we feel about ourselves as sexual beings, and also go in the reverse. So we can have an impact, or our sexuality has an impact on how we engage with those particular topics. So for example, biological and erotic, a really great example to show you the difference is the TTC, trying to conceive, is something that you'll come across quite often when couples are choosing to have a baby and they're watching their cycle, the woman's cycle, and then trying to have sex at the right cycles for the purpose of procreation. And when this isn't happening immediately, this can become very stressful for couples, and they can lose the fun and the play from their sex life because of the pressure that trying to conceive can create. So in converse, if you're just having sex for the fun of it, for the love of it, for the lust of it, because you want to connect intimately with your partner, that's more of the erotic side. It's not just about fantasies, it's about the expression of the biological need. So more of the pleasure part, and the biological is your drive to procreate. Now, the other aspects of this, so things like spiritual, that's a really obvious one. Your upbringing, your religious upbringing, is going to have a huge impact on how you understand yourself in the context of sexuality and the context of the broader culture that you were brought up in. So if you've had, for example, a highly Catholic upbringing, you're very likely to come out of that with some sort of reservations about sex and enjoyment of sexual pleasure. Somebody who has been brought up with a more free religion, or perhaps no religion, and a very open family around sexuality, is going to have less of those inhibitions. Now, our physical is the physical expression of our sexuality, but this for me also includes the way we dress and the way we carry ourselves. So, you know, someone who's very uncomfortable with their sexuality is probably not going to dress in any way that is provocative. They're probably going to feel very uncomfortable like that. And I know for myself, as I become more comfortable with my own sexuality, I'm more okay with dressing in a more provocative way, and not being worried about other people's perceptions of that, but also being able to hold my power in dressing in a provocative way. And, you know, knowing that it's not true that I might be eliciting trouble, or that it means I'm up for it. So sometimes you've got to release a lot of stereotypes and a lot of conditioning and baggage and shaming to be able to engage in this free expression. But it's also how we play out the erotic. It's how, you know, whether you're always fucking or whether you're making love. You know, there's a huge difference between those two extremes. And there's a huge difference between a session that goes for a couple of hours and a quickie. So the physical is like this physical manifestation of how you do your sexuality in your physical world. And then there's emotional and social. So this is how we create our ties with the people around us and the broader cultural context in which we live. So emotional is going to be impacted, for example, by the ties that we had with our primary caregivers, and how ideas about that were reinforced through life. And also going to be impacted, another really obvious one is abuse that we've experienced. So if we've experienced sexual trauma, or a lot of physical trauma, or even a lot of emotional and psychological trauma, that can sort of close us down to the beauty of our sexual being. Our emotional self is a very vulnerable self, and there are a lot of people out there that don't know how to hold a safe container and a strong container for people that are emotional beings. And as a result of having a lot of repressed and pent up emotions, we can lose touch with our sexuality. In a way, our sexuality is quite a creative expression of self. And if you can imagine lots of bottled up emotions inside, then your sexuality is going to be part of that creativity that gets held inside and isn't going to be safe to share with people. So you can end up with sort of difficulty creating intimate relations with people if you've had a lot of your boundaries broken, or if you've been in situations where you might have ended up with abandonment from certain things that are coming on. So then some part of your system has an expectation that people aren't going to stick around and they're going to let you down. So if you're experiencing that, then understanding, sometimes getting outside help, but also understanding that the interaction you're in now isn't necessarily going to be like ones that you've been in the past is a huge part of that. So we're impacted by our broader cultural context, impacted by the way we were brought up, impacted by the spiritual context in which we were brought up, impacted by the conversations about sex that have been had around us, and whether we get a pleasure education, and all of these things affect the way that we then carry ourselves and how we express our sexuality. So you can think of sexuality as a really creative, flowing, feeling energy. It has a lot of raw power, and that can be scary for people. That moment when you're taken over by lust and you get this surge of emotion in the middle of intimate interactions with someone, that's hugely, hugely powerful and can be quite confronting if strong emotions aren't safe for you. So engaging with safe partners is a huge part of allowing your sexual expression in the bedroom to take place in a really loving and respectful way, but also to engage with safe partners can allow you to learn how to express yourself. It's not necessarily about getting them to teach you, but more about allowing yourself a platform through which you can play with something that is a really powerful, natural and normal and beautiful energy and part of you. So I hope this video helps you to understand a bit more about sexuality. I would love to know from you if there's one particular area here that you think you might be really good at or particularly weak at. So share with me in the comments if one of these, biological, physical, spiritual, social, erotic and emotional, if one of these particular influences of your sexuality stands out for you. Thank you so much for listening. Let pleasure be your guide.